All right, let's get started with our introductions. I am Alan Brown of Wolf Brown, and I'm pleased to welcome my two fellow discussants on this session, John Keyser and Justin Trieger from Miami. So John is in Calgary, Justin is in Miami, so we've kind of got a lot of bases covered. Welcome, everyone. John, give a little introduction of yourself, if you would, please.
Well, thank you, Alan. Thank you for allowing me to join this wonderful panel. So I am currently the CEO and president of the Honens International Piano Competition, but I've spent most of my life in orchestras and education. I was a colleague of Justin at the New World Symphony for a while. Prior to that, general manager at the San Francisco Symphony. Prior to that, I was working in Canada at the National Arts Center, but I've always had a great love of media. I would say that I have been generally unsuccessful in convincing arts organizations that media or digital transmissions need to be at the core as opposed to as a nice to have until the pandemic. And then I think Justin and I will agree that our phones started ringing off the hook of
Right.
people saying, how do we deal with this? And now, anyhow, we'll talk
Yeah.
about what's happened post-pandemic.
Great.
This
And
thing.
John, just give us a little background on your connection to Idagio and
So
what
thank you.
Idagio is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I moved to Berlin in 2020 at the height of the pandemic and started working very soon with Idagio, which is a Berlin-based classical music streaming service. And I was a director of partnerships. So under my purview, I was working with people like the Verbier Festival. Actually, Honens was one of their clients, although I was not the
Okay.
key account manager. So
Uh-huh.
just there was no collusion there. Just want to be transparent.
Another one of those jobs that turns into a funded job search. That's great, John. Thanks so much. Justin, could you give a little introduction of yourself, please?
Sure, sure. So I'm both an artist and a technology enthusiast. I came to New World in the mid 2000s originally to help steer their experiments in incorporating digital technology into educational programs. And over time have shifted more into the creative artistic side of what we do here. So I'm part of an internal media team who is tasked with producing some of our principal media projects, the Wallcast, which we'll talk about, but also some more strictly digital projects and products that we've been working on since the time of the pandemic when we properly understood what the value and potential of those things were. So I definitely border both the creative side of things and experimental technologies and engagement.
Excellent. And Justin is being modest. He's seen a lot of media projects come and go over his career, as well as John. So thank you both, gentlemen, for doing this. I tried mightily to find someone from the theater field to join us on this conversation, but failed. So maybe we have someone in the registration list who represents that perspective, and I will encourage you to pipe up a little later in the session. But I just want to give you the little background here. As a researcher, during the pandemic, we were studying audiences on a longitudinal basis every month, asking questions about when people would come back to cultural events. At one point, we had 650 organizations worldwide doing that. And of course, we started asking questions about sort of interest in digital programming as early as 2020 and moving into 2022. And then we've continued asking questions about sort of interest in digital programming. And I just thought that there was an opportunity here to elevate some thinking about sort of what is the future of sort of digital content in a sector that defines itself by the live experience. And how are we managing that? Because I kind of have the sense that we're not in a particularly healthy place in terms of thinking about how digital content can contribute to our missions. So that's why we're here today. And I'm hoping that we can surface some assumptions that may be true, may not be true, that we need to challenge, and pose some research questions coming out of this session today that would help us as researchers kind of understand what research needs to be done to address this topic. So before we delve into the sort of open discussion, I want to share a few data points with you. And I also want to say that we have just recently released some data into our public dashboard. Those of you who are on the Audience Outlook Monitor list should have access to the public dashboard. One of my colleagues can put that information into the chat. It's the login information, but we're trying to release publicly data, that aggregated data from our various studies, so that there's more learning that is possible. But I wanted to share with you just a couple of charts from what is now in the public dashboard. So all of this is stuff you can see by yourself. But back in 2022, we were still in the pandemic. We were asking people about at-home entertainment. And we asked people if they watch film and television programs at home. And of course, people were saying, yeah, I'm watching more film and television at home. And you see results here for a cohort of orchestras on the left and a cohort of theaters on the right. And it's even a little higher for theaters, where there's an affinity for drama. And of course, we have the explosion of high quality drama on television, and people were acclimating to that content during the pandemic. And we asked people to anticipate, after the pandemic is over and you're able to go back to live performances, what role do you think online programs will play in your cultural life? And this is interesting on a couple of dimensions here. About 40% of the people says, really, actually, I don't want anything to do with online programs. We try to avoid the word digital, right? Online programs, which is interesting because many of those people are watching digital content on TV, right? And movies, but they're 4 out of 10 saying not interested. And not really that many think at the time that online programs would play a substantial role, only 14% in the theater and 12% in the orchestra, right? But then you have this large group of people who say, oh, I think it'll play a small role. So they're not writing it off. Maybe they're skeptical, maybe they don't have a lot of experience with it, but the point here is that a majority of people say that there will be at least some role in their cultural life moving forward. And when you stratify that by age, you see something interesting, and we saw this all during the pandemic, is that older folks were more likely to be actually consuming digital content than younger folks, potentially because they were more concerned about going out and catching COVID, and therefore more likely to be taking advantage of online programs. And for the theater folks, it's interesting, you had younger folks saying there'll be a small role, but you also had the older folks also saying some role. Then we've been asking some questions about consumption of streaming services. This was from our communications. No, this is from the orchestra COVID survey, still same survey. And we're just basically, this is frequency of watching streaming services such as Netflix, Disney Plus, Paramount, and Hulu. And basically, you see a pretty high frequency. And it's a little lower for folks in the 65 plus cohort. But for folks in the younger cohorts, most people are watching daily or several times per week, which isn't really surprising. But when we ask about music listening, now just audio streaming, look at these frequency figures. It's such a dominant modality of consumption in our culture in general, and particularly amongst arts ticket buyers, and especially younger ones, right? I guess no surprise there. And then we did ask people, which streaming services do you subscribe to? And you see some interesting generational shifts going on here with Spotify, really dominating the landscape with the younger cohorts and in the middle-aged cohorts. Interesting, less so, older folks are using a variety of streaming services. They're still on Pandora, God bless, John, and SoundCloud and others. So I've just got one or two more charts here. It's a whole nother story. In our communications and media use survey, we're finding declining use of email by younger consumers. We're seeing declining use of print collateral, of print media. But one of the few bright spots in the communications landscape is podcasts. Is more younger people are watching podcasts, listening to podcasts, and some people with a high frequency. Right? It's not everyone, but it's one of the few trends now that skews towards younger. And this is interesting because this is sort of like radio all over again, in a funny way. And then we asked people if they subscribe to any of these arts-specific streaming services, including Idagio here, John, and 90% of them don't. These are arts ticket buyers, right? They would be the best candidates for subscribing to these. And, this is a mixed bag of organizations. So there would be some variation here by discipline. If we were only looking at theaters, there'd be a little different. I mean, we do have Broadway HD in here, and it does kind of register on some of the age groups. But by and large, very low percentages of arts ticket buyers are taking advantage of these aggregation services. And I'm going to ask John in a few minutes to really reflect on that. So I just wanted to share that. The takeaway point here is that the cultural lives of Americans is a hybrid of digital content and live. And that ship has sailed. People are acclimating digital content into their lives every day. Many people, almost every day. So when we pose the question, what is the future of digital content in the arts? We have to realize that the marketplace has acclimated to digital content. I guess that's the point I want to make. So let's get the discussion started. John, I'm going to throw this first question to you. I wanted to start, sorry if I'm sounding like such a critic of the situation, but there are some notable success stories, and I wanted to just throw a couple of those out. And I just found this yesterday, but San Francisco Opera now is ticketing live streams. And I just found this on their website. It's a great example. I think within their run of an opera, I think it's the third performance, they're live streaming, and the tickets here are $27.50. I can't scroll because this is a screenshot, but you have to download one of the apps to enable to access this. So there's a little technology hurdle to doing this. But I thought, okay, here's someone who is post-pandemic making a play for digital with their core programming. Boston Baroque is a success story, and John, I know you have some familiarity with them, so maybe you can just tell their story to us.
Certainly, and I don't know if you can see it on the screenshot, but it says available on Idagio. Oh, it is right at the bottom, available on Idagio. So Boston Baroque was an early adopter of live streaming. I will just say that they started building their live stream audience in, I would say, what I call concentric circles methodology, which worked well. They started first, of course, during the pandemic with the people who have been their in-person audience, but it expanded beyond that fairly quickly, and they have continued past this because their home base is Jordan Hall. If anybody's familiar with Jordan
Yeah,
Hall in
a
Boston,
tiny
beautiful.
little
Well,
ancient.
it's about maybe about the 950,000 seats, whatever, which
Okay.
depends. By European standards, that's a big hall, actually, interestingly enough. So they actually now, when I left Adagio, they had about 3,000 or so subscribers. In other words, they would have to do three performances in Jordan Hall to reach the same audience.
Wow.
And their audience had also spread quite widely. A lot of questions around how did that play in their earned revenue income line? Well, again, this is something that I'm not sure what it is today, but when I left Adagio about a year and a bit ago, it was basically about 33% of their earned income was accounted for in their live stream. So they really did a great job. I just see that actually they've just going to be looking for a new artistic director. Their longstanding founder has stepped down, so it'll be very interesting to see what the new person brings to that.
On
Um,
Idagio, John, how much did it cost for a
okay,
stream?
so cost is an interesting question, and I was going to get into that a little bit later, but I'll bring it up now. Originally they were, I think it was like, 20 euros, $20 or 20 pounds, etc. But very soon we started experimenting with instead of doing a set amount, we would actually put up there a range. So it started at low end at $5 or £5 or €5 up to 500. And what we found, interestingly enough, was that the average ticket price when we did that doubled from what we were asking in the past. So in
Sort of
other
like
words, it was
pay what you
$20.
can.
Yeah, people were especially for quality programming, and that's another discussion we have to have is what the content actually is. They actually did much better as posing a range, and people paid what they felt it was worth, and it was double what we thought originally what the price point should be. So that's a lesson, I think, to all of us. So
Mhm.
just to say that there are other streaming services that we can also talk about. Cleveland Orchestra's Adela, for example, also does extremely well. So anyhow, that's about
So
Boston Baroque.
what is it about this Baroque programming that lends itself to sort of digital access?
Well,
Not every city has a Baroque orchestra.
I will say that we never really knew, but we did find that Baroque audiences and choral audiences were
Right.
extremely loyal, and it's interesting. It's a niche of a niche market, right?
Right.
Both of those, but for some reason, it did attract. That was the biggest sellers on Adagio were Baroque and choral in
Which are
the what I call the
specialty
live
area.
stream, right?
Right. Yeah.
There are other things that we should talk about as well in terms of the type of programming that did extremely well in on Adagio, but and within what I call the taking a live performance and putting it on a video, Baroque and choral were the biggest sellers. Except for one other thing, competitions.
Oh, yeah. Right.
The idea of who's going to win, it's kind of like America's Got Talent phenomenon.
Yeah, right. You play that
So
card. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I just want to shout out to Boston Baroque. We're holding them up without them knowing it. And I think
true.
one of their video directors is a really talented guy named Matthew Principe.
Hmm.
And we just congratulate them on that.
Yeah.
So let's come back to that, John. There's so much to talk about. I want to get to competitions too, now that you're there. I just wanted to point out, like, this is digital content, but in a different venue. And I just want to raise that question of like, what's the venue? We've been assuming during the pandemic, the venue was the home, which is problematic in so many ways. But there are other venues, and San Francisco Opera, again, has been doing this for many years. It's free, but you have to register to get a ticket, so it builds their database. But this is digital content also. But Justin, I want to bring you in. New World Symphony was doing sort of outdoor simulcasts almost before anyone else. I know that actually a number of performing arts centers have added projection walls to the exterior of their facilities, since this. But give us a sense of the Wallcast program and other spin-off programs, if you would, from New World.
Sure. So the Wallcast programs are likely the most familiar project that New World Symphony has created to the outside world since we moved into our current facility, the New World Center, in 2011. And as you can see, these projection surface, which is roughly 7,000 square feet, attracts 2,000 to 3,000 people for these simulcasts in a very communal environment, not unlike the baseball stadium shot that we just saw. But as the principal product, digital product that New World creates, after doing it for many, many years, around the time of the pandemic, we decided that the product was good enough to then release to homes and individuals through a service we started shortly after 2020 called NWS Inside, which was our own foray into a private video distribution channel, for lack of a better descriptor. But it's the core digital product of the New World Symphony. It's multi-camera performance shoots that happen in an average year, 11 to 12 times. This current season, we've only got 8 scheduled just because they're an immense amount of work. Every one of these shows is scripted with somewhere between 300 and 600 shots, which are programmed, rehearsed. There's a team of roughly 9 to 10 videographers and directors and TDs and whatnot that help produce those shows. So there's a lot of work that goes into each and every one of those. Likely part of the reason they've been so successful, but also burdensome in terms of resources and otherwise. So we've been investing so heavily in this program, we felt like it was a waste just to utilize it for the audience that comes out in the park. So that's where the motivation, beyond the obvious lack of being able to host people in the hall during the pandemic, why we decided to enter the realm of live streaming and offering more archival performances that we've captured over the years on demand through that NWS Inside program. But that's just a quick overview.
Yeah, no, and I'll just confess that over the years I've done quite a bit of research for the New World Symphony, including focus group discussions with Wallcast attendees, and people talk about like fighting for their 4 square feet of lawn space. They come 3 hours early and they get their blanket down. And some of the people who enjoy the outdoor simulcasts are the same people who buy tickets for indoor performances.
Sure. And I think that's an important distinction to make when we're about all of these different ventures we're talking about. The experiences are not necessarily equitable or designed to replace one or the other, but they offer varying perspectives on the same thing, with strengths and weaknesses in both aspects. So
and now, do you have a mobile digital stage?
We do. We have it's a LED trailer that we now wheel around to locations around Miami with a surround sound system to complement it, where we can stage mobile wallcasts as we've termed them.
So I'm going to just also pitch something in here, because obviously I'm very passionate about this. The other thing that's interesting is that the audience outside is very much different than the audience inside in terms of the age, in terms of the diversity of the people there. It's become sort of a community convener as well.
So yeah. So what's so provocative to me about this, John and Justin, is the notion that there would be a live show in a conventional venue, and you're leveraging it for additional audiences. Initially just outside in this magnificent park with surround sound, awesome sound, awesome acoustical experience, right?
Yep.
And now you've got a mobile stage, and I'm kind of wondering, is there an emerging model here where arts groups are able to essentially leverage a live performance and take it into different spaces for different segments of the population? And I know there are rights issues here that I'm totally glossing over in terms of artist rights, and my business partner Joe Kluger is very involved in that. And maybe Joe, you could say a comment in just a minute or two. But Justin, what is that? Do you think there's a model here for leveraging content, live content, into multiple venues?
Is there a model? I would say yes. The readiness for venues to participate in that model, I'm not so sure about. I think for us, you pointed out the audio aesthetic that's created in the park and how unique that is. That's a very custom system, and converting that aesthetic to even the mobile wallcast environment is not a one-to-one translation, and why we don't necessarily do live streams through that system yet. So there's both, as you mentioned, a logistical licensing challenge, because whenever you license material for broadcast, they want to know exactly where and how many people it's going to reach. But also from a technical standpoint, there are some developments in audio technology that make this easier in terms of Dolby Atmos being able to up convert to higher channel orders or down convert to stereo. So you can take a very immersive Dolby Atmos sound recording and it can effectively play back on almost any system of any capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not even working in that space yet. So it's
okay.
Still a ways away. And the video, oddly, is the easiest part, which formerly was not the case. Video streaming technology is so advanced at this point that you can do it from your smartphone without much challenge in a cellular network. So the audio is actually, and as much as the video helps with immersion, for us, audio is, as an orchestral organization,
right,
almost as important.
Okay.
I would also say that weather is a factor. For example, what happens at New World with the Wallcast is fantastic, but it really wouldn't work here in Calgary except for maybe 2, maybe 3 months of the year, right?
Of course. Right.
So there's also it's for Miami, they can do it pretty much year round,
right,
which is great. And
well,
so
one of the reasons I asked this is because, as a researcher, we study constantly barriers to participation, and we find that there's a group of people who don't really identify with cultural venues, with going to play, going to formal auditoriums and sitting quietly with the phone off, and that experience is just not mapping to a whole segment of frankly music lovers. Right. So by moving by streaming to another space, you sidestep the problem with the venue. Of course, it's a different experience. It's not live. It's a simulcast, right?
Well, that's a bigger question in way of what content. Because, and I'll just throw this in here at this point, in our surveys at Idagio, we soon discovered that if you just take a straight transmission of what's happening in your hall, and it's primarily music, people are actually turning it on, but they're not watching; they're just listening.
Oh, interesting. Well, that gets to, I think, our list of questions, and I would point out, John, that actually many people go to concert halls and close their eyes and self hallucinate. Right? That's a whole nother story. Um,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So just as we dive into our questions now, I just want to, there's so many different kinds of digital content. And I think part of the problem is we're not really sorting out. There's digital projections used during live performances. Now you're starting to see, particularly in opera and theater, a lot more digital projecting used as staging and scenery. You're seeing obviously lots of digital content produced by marketers in the form of trailers and potentially podcasts, right? But we're really talking here, I think, about digital programs. It doesn't mean they have to be 90 minutes, right? But programs that are sort of core to the artistic output and that can be monetized eventually in some way. And there's obviously simulcasts. I mean, I worked with some orchestras who just completely ruled out the idea of live streams because they thought that the quality was inferior. I had research data that shows that there's a bunch of people who actually like the live stream because it is live, it has to get on the calendar, and if they don't show up, they miss it. And then we have recordings, of course, of programs, the explosion of recorded programs. Now, the legacy of the pandemic, of course, is this explosion of digital content, which I'm not sure where it's all going right now. If anywhere, I know there are rights issues. Again, some of that content was only licensed for a short period of time and then it's unusable. But some orchestras, the LA Phil, the Philadelphia Orchestra, produced gorgeous films of concerts that were extremely costly and beautiful works of art in themselves. Where is this content going, right? So I just wanted to give this overview. Joe, I just want to recognize you, say hi to Joe Kluger of Wolf Brown. Joe, you've been working in this sort of digital rights space. Do you want to just give us just a minute or two about some of the obstacles in terms of rights?
Yeah, I think I always look at digital distribution of performance content through the same lens that you do a strategic planning exercise for an organization. You have to be really clear about what your goals are and what audiences you're trying to reach, and what measures of success you want to achieve in order to determine which of the array of opportunities that you've outlined, Alan and John, are really wonderful. But each organization has a different set of strategic goals and objectives and needs to pick a digital distribution strategy that serves its interests. In some cases, the goal is going to be just let's reach more people. That's our mission. And whether we monetize that or give it away for free doesn't really matter. In some cases, the digital content is a vehicle for achieving some other institutional objective, like audience development. In my experience, to answer your question about how do you clear the rights for this, I could spend 3 hours talking about the topic, but I'll give you a 30-second summary of it, which is if you bring representatives of all the key stakeholders to the table when the goals and objectives and strategies for your digital platform are created, you're much more likely to get their buy-in to the notion of doing this and clearing getting their approval. If you're like the San Francisco Opera or the New World Symphony, and you have a closed circuit objective of reaching people in your local area, but just beyond the concert hall or the opera house, there's a tradition of people saying yes to that. The minute you say, I want to distribute this content worldwide, there's a lot of artists who will say, okay, but what is your objective and what is the economic return on that investment, and how much of it are you going to share with the artists? And as long as you're demonstrating good faith to be clear about what your goals are and to share whatever economic return there is on it with those who are creating creating that product, most artists and most organizations participating in this will agree to it if you do it in the right kind of way.
I think
So-
it's also quite different for theaters versus orchestras who hire soloists and conductors who all have to be negotiated with
Yeah.
differently.
Joe, would you say a few words about the other rights, i.e. publisher?
You need I meant to include, John, all of the individuals and organizations that are involved in the creative process. It includes not just performers, but as you quite rightly point out, composers and publishers, stagehands, the venue in which you perform if it's not one you own. All of these rights holders are entitled to have their permission requested, and they have the authority to say yes or no to it, and the negotiation, either in a collective manner or in an individual manner, for clearing those rights. In the digital space, there are certain rights for composers and publishers cleared through compulsory licenses, but the minute you're creating an audio-visual product, you have to seek a voluntary license from the composer and publisher and the rights holder.
Right. Sounds like a virtual quagmire of rights.
Insurmountable opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, that may very well be a reason why our sector is not moving more quickly.
No, I don't think that's the barrier. And I think the barrier is a lack of, as you pointed out, the volume of activity that took place during the pandemic has waned, and people are so primarily focused on serving the live performance audience that they have de-emphasized the investment in this and don't recognize that there's still a post-pandemic potential to achieve institutional objectives if you make it a core part of your organization's activity.
Right. Thanks, Joe. So I've posed a number of unanswerable questions for the sake of discussion here, and I'm going to ask my colleague Anik Odom to post the asterisk questions in the chat and invite all of you to kind of brainstorm with us on some of these questions. But I kind of hear this over and over again. It's not live, therefore it's not really valuable. The impact isn't the same. We define ourselves about live performances. And so any talk of digital is somehow marginalized to something, sort of ancillary and not core. And my provocation is that just because we haven't figured out how to monetize it, and if we could figure out how to monetize it, maybe it would become core. John, do you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I think that's the issue, and again, I'm going to bring it back to the content. If you offer your digital audiences something that they could only get through digital, that is going to help bring a greater value to it, and people are more likely. So I'll just sort of run down that we learned a lot from our surveys at Adagio in that basically one of the overriding aspects that came back to us again and again is that people actually want to learn something from the digital transmission. It's not just enough to be able to sit there and watch a concert or a theater or an opera, etc., but they want to understand. So documentaries actually rated very highly with us, as well as backstage chats, as well as people talking about the music. And again, I reference Adela. You don't have to subscribe. You just have to look at some of their trailers about how they actually help people understand more about the music. And sure, you can do that in the live concerts and with program notes and with pre-concert lectures, but when it's intertwined with the product, that really helps. So to me, it's about bringing value and then building up your audience in those concentric rings that will help. Yep.
Oh, if I could just add, we have so much data that shows that in terms of interest in learning more about the art form, single ticket buyers are just as passionate as subscribers, which is somehow shocking. I think we project onto subscribers all the positive attributes of passionate art lovers, but guess what? People who only come once, the great unwashed single ticket buyers, are just as passionate about the art and learning more, right?
Yeah, Alan, I was going to comment because the perspective you outlined, I think, is a very silly one, and I think most people would acknowledge that if they actually thought critically about it. There's also typically when folks who traditionally are presenting in-person experiences come to digital content for the first time, they're the model of who is patronizing that digital content is exactly the same person who's going to come for the in-person shows, which I think is a mistake. So those, as John was talking about, it's all about value proposition. So who are you trying to reach with the digital content? And I would argue it's most likely not the people who are already purchasing tickets and coming to the shows in person, because that's where they're going to be. So servicing those undiscovered audiences, those potential audiences using digital content is really where the value lies. And it's up to organizations and individuals to figure out who are those people, like you said, single ticker buyers, potential there, I think. But who are those audiences on the fringe who your organization or company has not engaged yet that do really want to see what you're doing? And digital is a way to get them to step in the door on the way to becoming a ticket buyer or whatever you want to offer them. But I think it's really important to have this hierarchy of audiences when you're talking about in-person versus digital experiences, because I don't think they are one and the same.
That's great. Moving on, during the pandemic, we actually have some data on this, but most people were watching content on a laptop and not connecting to a premium speaker system. Or their phone. And I'm just concerned that if you're watching a theatrical performance or an orchestra concert on a laptop with native speakers, like what is possible in terms of quality of the experience? And is that still a win? Yes, someone is watching our content, but are we able to impact them the way we'd like to? Anyway, John, do you want to?
Oh, there's a piece missing here. You should have also asked, sure, you're watching on your devices, but are you using headphones? Because actually we found that a lot of people would, because it's basically there were a few people who would have kind of like viewing parties, right? And you get together, but those people were likely to put it up on their, UHD screen and their Sonos or what other system, and sort of have that kind of salon experience with their friends. And that's something else that we should think about too. Is that, but headphones we found that actually the quality you get from that is actually quite amazing. And if anybody is able to actually broadcast in Dolby Atmos, it's maybe even better than what you hear in their home.
My guess is sort of that so many people have been listening to digital content with really bad audio that when they hear the new immersive sound technology, it'll be like rediscovering music all over again.
Possible, yes. It's very possible. So anyhow, sorry. Well, let's carry on.
Justin, do you have any perspective on that second question about devices?
Absolutely. So my opinion about this is that you asked, is it a win if they're watching regardless of the quality? Yes. So if you're reaching someone who otherwise wouldn't have engaged with your company or the art that you're producing otherwise, how is that not? And I think the question is actually better posed to those people who are watching it through these devices. Are they having a satisfying experience consuming that way? If the answer is yes, then there's total validity to that. We can have a very high opinion of our output and the things that we're making and be very precious, and we should care very deeply about the quality of experience we're putting out there. But we should not be the arbiters of whether or not someone should be enjoying it in any particular way.
So
the Justin, other measure, and Mark Kirchner just pointed out in the chat that the length of engagement is also a measure. How long are people sticking to it? And our experience is that they are very they are very engaged because they're listening for much longer chunks than they would anything else, right?
So just to be provocative, I'll share with you a somewhat traumatizing conversation I had with a prominent artistic director. I won't say who or even what discipline, but I said, would you curate a digital series where you drop a screen in your lovely hall and show people opening night at a European performing arts organization, or the latest production at an Asian company, and like essentially bring the best art in the world to your community. And this artistic director looked at me and said, "Oh, I would never do that. It's not my work." And I was stunned to hear that, and in that comment realized something about our whole sector, unfortunately. But why wouldn't, if hypothetically you're the artistic director of a theater or an opera company or an orchestra, why wouldn't you want your people to have access to the greatest music or theater or dance in the world? It's not your work. So you think they're going home and licensing, and watching stuff on YouTube that's not your work.
Yeah, there's another factor, is how much content do you put up there? And during the pandemic, everybody was throwing everything up there, and it was just overwhelming.
Well, I'm glad you said that, John, because in fact, I have a comment about that. I think I'm reflecting, I think a lot about purchase decision process, like how do people think about deciding what to do, and how do people make choices? And actually, maybe this begins to speak to why so few people subscribe to these different aggregation is just people are overwhelmed with choices. And humans, with all our flaws, are really bad at learning how to make choices. Our whole culture is learning how to train streaming services, and I just think it's the Wild West in terms of content, digital content. There's so much on so many different platforms from so many different producers. And if you believe Barry Schwartz, who wrote a brilliant book called The Paradox of Choice 20 years ago, it suggests that the value that arts organizations can bring is curating, is helping people choose experiences and recommending experiences and hosting experiences that help people navigate this impossibly comprehensive set of choices. So I'm glad you said that, John. Just before we move on.
Well, and Alan, sorry, I do want to add one thing. Along the lines of what you're talking about, for the maestro who is resistant, I wonder if you would argue that audience development is part of his responsibility or the organization's responsibility.
Right.
Because providing a curated experience to people who you want to cultivate as an audience is part of most organizations' jobs, I would argue.
How else are you going to nurture a love for dance or opera or classical music? Like, it's not happening with your live performances, either because there's not enough of them or people don't come frequently enough to grow that love. So is digital content not potentially the opportunity to introduce people to art they've not seen, right?
Yeah.
At a very low risk.
I mean, I have a question, and I don't know if this is reality or I'm just not really seeing this clearly, but it seems to me that post-pandemic, people are more interested in a more intimate experience.
Yes.
Smaller halls, what I call the salon, effectively. And I wonder if it was partly spurred by actually having a much more intimate experience if you're watching digital transmissions.
Totally. So thank you for setting up my question here, which is, have we been wrong to think the home is the primary venue for consuming? Are there opportunities for arts organizations to create intimate spaces for experiencing digital programs that are curated? So you could go, for example, you could go to the New World Symphony and there would be a listening lab or room or installation where you could order up some, Pablo Casal's recital from 60 years ago or Vladimir Horowitz's last recital at Carnegie Hall, and it would become this sort of digital archive where it would open up the whole history of the art form.
Yeah, I think if you did that in combination, what we tried also at Adagio, which actually was quite successful, was to sort of build listening parties. And you
Yes,
would be in a digital room with others.
totally.
You could actually talk with others about various
Right.
aspects, and it became a social thing. Now,
You could have the Wagner room. It would be very dark.
yeah, but you need somebody there who's also facilitator, because there's always shy people who don't want to say anything. They think you're going to say something stupid, etc. But that is extremely important. Just as all the organizations we found who actually were and now or were basically having a chat room during the performance,
Uh-huh.
also doing well. And in fact, I reminded Houston Symphony did this, and their CEO, John Mangum, was the one who actually answered all the questions that were coming in the chat room.
Right. Awesome.
And there was a great personal connection there as well. So I
Well,
think,
there's a theme that I just want to acknowledge from both you, Justin and John, about sort of the educational value of digital content being, as being incremental value to people. I'm hearing that. I want to move on to this next issue because there's an equity aspect to this discussion, and several of our guests have commented in the chat about it. But I particularly think about rural communities or also other underserved communities, including people with various living with various disabilities who don't have access to live performances or who will never be able to go see such and such an orchestra or such and such a ballet company, and have we, meanwhile, we have all this digital content, right? We have the technology. Like what's stopping us, John, from using digital content to enrich the lives of people who otherwise would not be able to access this?
I know it's a very, very good point. And since moving back to Canada, this is something that, talk about remote isolated communities, there's a number of them. And to be quite honest, that's one of the major functions of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, but also National Arts Centre has produced programming that really meant to sort of to bring content to these people who are geographically isolated. But I think you bring up a very good point. We also have at Honans, we're working to also to not cater to us, that's a bad way to put it, but to include audiences of the neurodivergent.
Uh-huh.
That's through live, but it can be done also through digital means that are far less challenging for these people to actually to be part of a cultural event.
Justin, what's your perspective on this?
Well, so as I said before, I originally came to New World looking at how technology can be implemented in higher music education. And I think the value is apparent to everyone at this point. I myself take music lessons from a guitarist in Colorado over Zoom every week. So yes, in short, there's a huge amount of opportunity. One of the biggest things we do every year in our streaming calendar is a highly produced education concert, which we distribute throughout the local public school system here in Miami. Comes complete with a guide and activities and all these things. So there's unique ways to look at bringing that digital audience into a more engaging and personalized experience through actual physical media and materials you distribute with that stuff. And just one other anecdote too, we've really invested heavily this year in building out our YouTube presence. And that's been a mix of recordings and archives of master classes with principal guest artists and very illustrious musicians and conductors, alongside archival performance videos that we have from years and years of stuff. And the educational material is far and away the most popular.
Yeah.
I think
Uh-huh.
the value that people find in having a unique vantage into the art form and the way that it's made,
Right.
it's really something special that people are not capitalizing on.
Yeah.
I completely agree. And in fact, Justin, you probably remember our Viola Festival. And one of the offerings of the Viola Festival was basically sort of a master class in a way by Kim Kashkashian. And we started looking at the numbers. This was done through also Facebook and also through the Violin channel, which changed its name, by the way, to the Viola channel for that week. And we started seeing these numbers, and they were growing and growing. And then I think at the peak, we were at about 27,000 people viewing this masterclass. And at first we thought, oh, maybe the people misread the name. They think it's Kardashian, but no, they were there to learn more about the viola. And the
Right.
interesting thing was the Q&A at the end of it. A lot of the of this Q&A were parents saying, my kid wants to play the
Right.
viola. Are they going to be living on my couch
Right.
for the rest of their life? And so this is
Yeah. Well,
something which I
no,
think we found out. Yeah.
I'm so glad to kind of end on that positive note, and especially the educational value. And I think part of the structural challenge we have as a sector is that every individual institution thinks they have to do this themselves, and they don't.
Right.
Right. And this is like, we have to start acting differently. Funders need to start funding differently. So you have consortia of organizations collaborating to produce all this, excellent content, educational content. I mean, was it last year or the year before the Martha Graham Company toured? I mean, there should have been a fabulous 60-minute documentary, like that everyone shared, and whole curricula around that, right? That everyone
Exactly.
shared. But it's no
Exactly.
one's job to do that right now. And it's a structural flaw in our sector, I think. But I just want to wrap up, first of all, by thanking John and Justin for going out on a limb and doing this. And also just to provoke everyone that, so many arts organizations are in so much difficulty right now because people are not coming back at the same rates that they were before the pandemic. We have structural problems with our budgets. And we have all these people in our database who, if they came back once every 2 years, right, it would solve our problems, right? And I would like to think that we could find a way to engage people in our missions who can't come to live performances for one reason or another. Maybe they live halfway around the world. Maybe they live on the street. Maybe they have personal reasons they can't come. Like, how can we engage the larger public, especially using digital content, in a way that helps us broaden our mission impact, keeps people engaged, and hopefully has a positive monetary impact on our budget. So we're right at 3 o'clock. I have to let everyone go, but I just want to thank everyone for coming in on this. Thank you all for the comments in your chat. We will publish a recording of this session, including all the comments in the chat, for you all to share. And thank you all for a vigorous discussion. John and Justin, a big thanks to you both. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you both.
convening.
Yeah.